All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the NCLA webinar. I am your host, Rachel Mann, and I am really excited for today's topic. It's a very important topic that is going to have some heavy material, but it also is an opportunity to not only address some serious issues within our education system and society as a whole, but also to be able to leave feeling empowered that we know what to do about it. So we have some action steps that we can take moving forward. Please take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. And throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. We hope to have time at the end for a Q&A. If we do not, our panelists have been very gracious to agree to respond to those questions by sharing their email address as part of the materials you'll have for today's webinar, and you'll be able to reach out to them with those questions and keep the conversation going. For folks who are tuning in asynchronously, so you're listening to the on-demand version through YouTube, thank you for joining us. You also have an opportunity to connect with our fabulous panelists today and share out questions and thoughts. And also, if there are other ideas or success stories that you have that you would like to share with the group, that would be fantastic too, so that we're able to learn from each other and grow together. So thank you for being here today. Thank you to our panelists. I'm going to have each unmute and introduce themselves and share a little bit about why this topic is important to you. And Patrick, can we start with you?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And Rachel, thank you so much for hosting this chat. My name is Patrick Clausen, and I'm a professional development specialist at the Western Maricopa Education Center in the western part of Phoenix, Arizona. So what I get to do is I actually get to teach folks who come from industry how to be teachers. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I have history as an educator. Began my education career back in 2007 as a middle grade science teacher and served in that capacity for 6 years. So I've taught middle grades, science, mathematics, reading, writing, and then I moved into high school, was able to move into high school and teaching CTE in particular because of my background in technology, sort of part-time in the military. And so that's been, that was what was able to give me that platform to be able to go into a career in technical education.
And Patrick, do you mind sharing a little bit about why this topic is important to you?
Of course. Apologies, I'm going to step on your response. So this topic is important to me because when I was growing up, I struggled. I struggled in middle school. I struggled in high school. As you can tell, I have a very low amount of energy. So it was very challenging for me. And I always looked around at other people, particularly other students, and said, why is this so damn easy for everybody else? And why is it so hard for me? And when I became an educator, it was much like, I think the reason why people who study psychology become psychologists, I really wanted to know why. Why is this so tough? Why is it so hard for me? Why is learning so difficult? But then I realized that I truly love learning. And so I embraced that and became an educator, and this became my life's work. And then as an educator, I noticed that there was a disparity between the boys that sat in my classroom, especially middle school boys, pre-adolescent boys. Also, and then in the high school classroom, there was a disparity between girls and boys. And I noticed that girls were very good at sitting and getting. They were very good at sitting and listening to lectures. And of course, you know, my teaching style has evolved since I began teaching a long time ago. But truly, I noticed that boys needed a different type of delivery of their learning. And what really opened my mind to this was when I made the transition into career and technical education. And I saw the impact that CTE and the methodologies that we use in CTE to engage all students, but particularly what kind of impact that had on young men. And over to Speranza.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Speranza Cleese, and I'm also here at WestMac. WestMac is the largest career and technical education district in Arizona. We are in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. And what I do here at WestMac is I manage post-secondary partnerships, which means that I ensure that the majority of our programs have a an articulation to a post-secondary pathway. This is very important for all students, but especially for boys. And I will speak to this issue later in the presentation. Personally, what has brought me to this topic of boys and their achievement is prior to working in CTE, I had a full career in international baccalaureate. So in that capacity, I was working with very highly achieving students. And I was oftentimes walking into classrooms to, work with students. And I just distinctly remember the day when I walked into the AP calculus class and there were just only girls. And that just struck me that day. And I thought that perhaps the boys were like on some sort of field trip or something. And but they weren't. There just simply were no boys in AP calculus, a class where I knew that class was just generally dominated by boys. So I looked to myself and thought that I was mismanaging my program, and somehow I was not attracting, recruiting, and retaining the boys. But then as soon as I began researching this, I realized that there really was an issue with boys in AP Calculus and really in the International Baccalaureate altogether. There was really an issue with boys' achievement. And it wasn't just at my school or in my program, it was just really in the country. At the same time, as a mother raising two girls and one boy, I was seeing this in my personal life too. So this has led me to research this and to become an advocate for the achievement of boys. And we will talk, this is why we are here today, to talk about this in a little bit more depth. And now to Dr. Aaron Parsons.
Hello, Aaron Parsons. Much like the other two who went, introduced themselves ahead of me, I also work for Westmec, which is in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a campus administrator out here at one of our campuses. I've had an opportunity to be an instructional coach for teachers, worked with some PD on new teachers, as well as I was a CTE teacher and I taught engineering. Much like Mr. Clausen talked about during his introduction, my awareness of this issue started when I became a freshman in high school. And I won't date myself. You can probably see the gray in my beard. And if you're listening through audio, there's quite a bit there. So it was a little while ago. I failed almost every class during my freshman year. And it hit me, and it took a while to recover. More importantly, all of my friends were right there with me. So it wasn't a unique story. It wasn't a story that I wasn't seeing everywhere around me. But this was quite a few decades ago. And eventually I made my way back to a classroom. In my classroom, I taught engineering, which at the time was 98% male population. What I noticed is that every year between my first and second year, so I started with freshmen, I would lose at least 50% of my population transitioning onto year two. It took roughly 2 years before my administrator at the time sat me down and said, wow, what's happening here? Why are you, failing to retain 50% of your population? So we looked at the information, and I realized that oftentimes the students who were not following up with me for their second, third, and fourth years, it was because they were failing core subjects and they had to do credit recovery. Frequently, the only class that they were actually passing for their freshman year was my engineering class, which was, at the time I was like, wait a second, I'm teaching them applied math, I'm teaching them applied science, but they're failing these courses when they take it from an academic perspective. And I knew that I was teaching them math that was sometimes at a different level, at a higher level than what they were experiencing in their Algebra 1-2 class. So it made me step back and reflect and say, wow, this was me as a freshman, 30 some years ago. And this is still a thing that's happening where many, many freshman boys just fail. They fail when they get to high school. They fail to achieve those core academic courses, and it impacts them. But all these teachers would come and talk to me as a CTE teacher and say, "How are you doing it? What are you doing with it? This person is not functional in my class. They're completely disengaged. They don't do the work. They cannot apply themselves. What are you doing in your class?" And it took me a little while to get to an answer. Fortunately, as I started to research that, I had the opportunity to move to Westmac. I met Speranta Cleese and Patrick Clausen, and we all realized that we had the same interesting question burning in the back of our head of what is happening to boys and why do they need CTE? What is special about CTE for helping young men out? Rachel, did you want me to just continue and jump kind of into the topic since I've already started?
Well, Dr. Parsons, yes, this is such an interesting topic that I don't think a lot of people realize, because we spend a lot of time focusing on getting more females interested in STEM and CTE and non-traditional pathways, that we don't talk about what I've heard you mention as a boy problem. And you're the one that first introduced me to the statistics about boys falling behind on multiple metrics years ago. I think it was back in 2018 that you first introduced me to that topic. And in one of the topics you've talked about, and you can continue on with that piece, but I would love for you to touch on the Peter Pan effect.
Yes. So just to highlight one of the things you were saying there, because it is part of the story, as a CTE teacher, it seemed like every conversation I would have was, how do I introduce non-trad into the program? What are my non-trad numbers? And those were tracked. And there was a lot of effort being put into, how do I introduce and make my program, which is clearly so unwelcoming, welcome to a non-traditional sense. And it was weird that every time I said, okay, well, that's a great question, but what are we doing about the students that I'm already failing? That nobody wanted to have that conversation until I encountered, the company that's in the room with me today. The Peter Pan effect is kind of something that derives from the statistics, but really what it comes down to is that in the society today, there's a lot of expression about being male is toxic. Being masculine has negative connotations. You can see in popular media, the Homer Simpson effect might be one that I highlight, where men are often portrayed as the aggressor or the bumbling person that needs somebody to take charge of their life and make them into something worthwhile. So what we see is that young boys, and when I say young boys, I mean very adolescent young men, they're loved, they're celebrated, they're rewarded. People like them. As they get older, they have to confront that issue that they're going to be perceived as a potential danger, toxic, or if they express themselves, it's going to, people are going to cringe away from them. And we don't have a lot of healthy role modeling for men as young men, as they become a man. They don't know what it looks like to be a respectable, healthy man in society. And they're afraid of it. And it causes them to disassociate and try and retain that youth and resist the idea of growing up, which feeds into some of the issues that we have when we look at the perception of men in society. That was long-winded, I apologize.
No, that's a great explanation. And I think that really does help shed some light on some behaviors that folks may see as students are moving into high school, and you have a student who still feels like a child inside, but the size of their body doesn't necessarily match up. You have a student who's hit this growth spurt, and sometimes they don't even realize how they're perceived. And folks need to be aware of the Peter Pan effect and how we change those perceptions. Very important. And with that, and this ties into just what you're just talking about, how are men seen in popular media?
Well, and I just talked about it a little bit, with, I call it the Homer Simpson effect. I don't think that's actually a name. But I think back to Homer Simpson when I look at it. He needed Marge in his life to corral him and make his voice worthwhile, because left on his own, he was going to just be all over the place, uncoordinated, kind of an idiot, and really not functional. And what we see is men are either perceived as a threat, as toxic, something that we need to curtail and contain, or like, they would be so good if they just had a female in their life that would take charge of them and make them valuable. And it's an unfortunate predicament that we can't create a society where everybody is celebrated by marginalizing someone in any shape or form. You can't do that. So if we want a society where men can really become who they're supposed to be, we have to celebrate and role model for them what that looks like and what it looks like in a functional society. Demonizing the attributes of them, it just makes them want to embrace that Peter Pan effect. And unfortunately, when we do that, what we're doing is we're tilting the bar and making it more challenging as well for any gender to be fully actualized in society.
And can you share with us if just thinking about matrices where men are outpacing women, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. Like I mentioned, early in my career, the conversation was always about non-traditional enrollment. What do we do with non-traditional enrollment? And I was presented with statistic after statistic of where certain genders fell short in society, and that we needed to have a call of action to address that. So when I moved into the realm of trying to answer for myself, what is happening to boys in the classroom? What is happening to the students I serve, and how am I failing, and what do I need to do? I started realizing some statistics that ran very contrary to what I understood to be true. When it comes to statistics of where men lead women, there are three primary statistics in society today that men lead women, and it's death by gun violence, incarceration, and suicide. Those are the three, when you average everything out, those are the three statistics that men lead women in right now in the United States. Suicide, men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide. Recent data just demonstrates that life expectancy of males has reduced 2/10, where female life expectancy continues to grow. And this data was not something that I could hear or work with at the time. Our incarceration rates have increased 700% since 1973, with it being something like 93% young men. And oftentimes, those are marginalized classes that we talk about. So this is a pretty large problem that we don't really pay a lot of attention to, and I think is centered in how we educate young men in our society.
Wow, I have to say my heart sunk because I did not know where you were going to go with those statistics, and that was painful to listen to. That's some really unfortunate data, and I think it's important to hear that data because it helps us to better address the problem as we really understand how dire it is. And before we jump into the academic aspect of this topic, is there anything else that the other panelists, Patrick or Spranta, wanted to share, thinking about the social emotional side of this topic?
Well, before we move on, I wanted to share one other topic one other, I guess, statistic that I wanted to approach. When we look at society, when we create these Peter Pan effects, what we do is we create a class of people called DEET, or disconnected youth. Right now, the last time I pulled this data, it was during COVID, so it's had some, it needs a refresher, but it was 30 million young men who are of an age of working, and they're not applying themselves. They have not successfully moved into society. And this carries an impact. There's something like an $800,000 price tag that sits on every taxpayer for each of these people across their lifetime. So when we talk about a society and moving forward in a way that is going to keep us at the front end, this is not a good way to go. We need to figure out how to raise the bar, not tilt the seesaw. So with that,
No, thank you for that additional context. That's important information. And we're going to talk to Speranza a bit about the academic piece. Speranza, what can you share with us about what is going on with boys in schools?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Aaron. Very powerful information. Well, I'm here to tell you that we do have a boy crisis in America. The data from my end is also very concerning and quite overwhelming. I can start by sharing with you that men account for 40% of college graduates. And on the other side, like Aaron stated, men account for 70% of drug overdoses and 80% of gun violence deaths. So yes, we do have a boys crisis in our country, and we really do have to work together to address this crisis. And we really have to start by talking about it and becoming aware of it. So thank you for attending today's webinar and talk. I am a woman. I'm a mother of girls. I'm a career educator and a community member. So I really do want to say that I'm very aware that women are facing many issues as well. This gender inequality is more than a two-way street. I really want to say that as a woman. These issues exist side by side. They're equally important issues. So we need to talk about them in equal ways. Here at Westmac, all of my colleagues, as well as all of you who are in this meeting, we believe in the achievement of both boys and girls. So I also want to say that. It is important for our country because in terms of demographics, we have roughly half of our population be boys and girls, men and women. So therefore, we need to promote the achievement of both sexes. So it's very important that we pay attention to the achievement of both. So today we really are focusing on what's going on in the education sphere with boys. So let's talk about a percentage that's really burning my brain, and I'm hoping to impart the urgency of this percentage to all of you. So this percentage is 70%. What's going on with 70% on the side of boys? Well, this is what I can tell you. 70% of D's and F's are earned by boys. 70% of high school valedictorians are girls. This is a big difference. What is going on with basic academic skills as they reflect in achievement test scores? Well, girls are outperforming boys in reading, in writing, in math, and science. Boys are 50% more likely than girls to fail basic proficiency standards on these core subjects. Boys have excelled typically at math calculations. They have typically in the past, and they still do. However, what is going on with modern math exams is that these math calculations that boys know how to do are now embedded inside difficult and lengthy word problems. So boys are not necessarily able to make their way through these lengthy word problems to get to the math calculations, so they're failing these math exams. What is also going on is that we're seeing that boys have lower aspirations, and how this is reflecting is that we are seeing that fewer number of boys and lower percentages of them taking rigorous college prep courses. Fewer of them are taking college entrance exams. they're not earning the GPAs needed, the class rank that's needed for competitive colleges, for competitive programs or graduate school admission or academic honors and scholarships. They're being replaced with girls in that arena. So again, this is a big shift from what we had seen previously. Data from various sources, including from College Board, tells us that it is the girls who are outpacing the boys with GPA, class rank, top 10%, SAT tests. Girls are in AP Calculus, just like I was telling you from my personal experience walking in that AP Calculus class. AP Science, AP World Language, AP English, AP art courses, etc. Early on, girls are planning not only for bachelor degrees, but they're planning ahead for graduate degrees, for medical and law school. They're now outnumbering boys and men in all of those arenas. Boys' aspirations for their futures tend to be much lower. So these are some of the concerning trends that we are seeing in school today.
And for
wow, said a lot.
it is. And for the folks who are tuning in live, there is a link in the chat that Spranta had shared with me previously that has the stats that both her and Aaron have shared, but additional stats as well. So please be sure to check that out. If you are tuning in on demand, there is a link to these stats in the information related to this video. So please check out that information so that you're able to also reference it, because this is a problem that we don't want to just address here during this webinar. We want you to take this back to your schools, to your districts, and help other folks to become aware of this. And Spranta, I really appreciate you too, being very cognizant of knowing that we're not eliminating half the population in either direction, just as Aaron has spoken about with the whole idea of not marginalizing one population. And Aaron, you had a really good quote related to this the other day about the how we have a tendency as a society to, I might mess it up. Do you remember the quote that you said?
Yes. So what I said is oftentimes we addressalize marginalized groups by attempting to marginalize another group. And that frequently, that just creates resentment and perpetuates the problem in a different direction. So, you know, I prefer Dr. King's approach of looking at drawing circles, bigger circles, to, you know, create a situation where you're raising a bar and you're calling everybody into a cohesive group rather than promoting one group at the detriment of another group. You can't tilt the seesaw. You have to raise the bar.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. And Spranta, the next question that I had for you, which you may have already addressed, why are boys falling behind at school?
Thank you for the question. And the answer is very complex. There are very many research studies and theories out there, so I can share a few of them with you and with our listeners. So back to those, to that 70%, that very concerning statistic of D's and F's versus the 70% on the girls' side, of 70% of girls of valedictorians being girls. So a lot of what goes into those statistics has to do with study and homework practices. So we are seeing a big difference between boys and girls. We see the girls much more so editing their work, rewriting drafts, collaborating with group members on projects, performing homework and study far more regularly than boys. This is definitely something that I have observed myself firsthand as a mother. If you are parents out there, you may have seen this in your own children. And I was also an English teacher. I don't think I said this in my introduction, but I did notice this as an English teacher, that the girls tended to be more so rewriting drafts versus the boys. My own son was always playing sports, and he didn't have, quote unquote, time to rewrite papers, especially with me as an English teacher for a mother. He did not want my help. He did not want to rewrite any papers, not interested. In general, the schooling environment that we have today in modern schools favors language and reading very much so, with very limited hands-on activities oftentimes, and this is not working for boys. Some studies definitely show that we start school so early in the morning, which also more so impacts boys than girls. Other research indicates that girls reach maturity faster than boys. And there are questions about boys starting school at a later age so that they can have the time to mature and be ready for academic learning. In school, boys also need more frequent breaks. They find it much more difficult to sit still. Girls are much better at sitting still in school and learning and focusing more so than boys. So there are all of these, reasons. Another reason has to do with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and boys are just much more likely to be diagnosed. Actually, they're twice as likely to be diagnosed. This is hugely linked with homework, with study, with down the road with juvenile incarceration, and also with dropping out of high school altogether for boys. There's another factor that that has to do with the number of boys raised by single moms. Actually, both boys and girls are raised by single moms, and that percentage in the last 20 years has increased by 40%. So, and this has to do also with what Aaron Parsons has shared about the media. So when children are raised by single moms, the single moms have been portrayed as hero moms, as stable achievers, whereas the fathers in the situations have been portrayed as lower achievers, absent dads, deadbeat dads, oftentimes even. So consequently, the girls raised in the situations by the single moms, who are the heroes, have modeled themselves after their moms. So the girls' aspirations have grown, modeling themselves after their hero moms, whereas the boys don't have such strong role models, male role models, that is. So for them, it has been different. So consequently, with media amplifying the toxic masculine messaging that Dr. Parsons discussed, this has been also an issue for boys. So these are just some of the theories and the research about why boys are failing in school.
And Esperanza, as you're talking about some of these data pieces, we have a question from Jeff Fleetham, and I apologize, Jeff, if I mispronounced your name. Is there any correlation between the explosion of travel sports to boys declining performance? And if you don't have that data right now, that's fine. It was just one that seemed good timing as far as talking about the data around this.
Make some assumptions about that.
Yeah, I don't know that in the readings there was any specific data that supported that. Much like Patrick, I think I was about to say is there's probably some correlation between welcoming pathways. So, Patrick is going to talk about this in a little bit about where boys feel actualized and why CTE seems to be a great outlet. And I might suggest that after listening to that, you could probably draw some correlations to that there's outlets that boys will try and filter to so that they feel actualized. I know that every person that I've ever met wants to feel valued and valuable. And, we tend to apply ourselves in those directions.
Thank you so much for the question. The data that we do have is that CTE helps. So we're discussing about those grade point averages and the fact that the boys are lagging behind on achievement test scores, but there is a place where boys shine, and that is CTE. And so we even felt so compelled that we wanted to get our own data. So we partner with Maricopa Community Colleges, which is a very large community college system here in the greater Phoenix area of over 100,000 students. So the data analysts at Maricopa Community Colleges extrapolated the grade point average of academics versus CTE at that college, and that is where our students go now. Our CTE students go there. And they discovered, as you might surmise from our presentation, that the girls do better in the academic realm, whereas the boys do better in the CTE realm. What wonderful news that the girls have a place to shine, and so do the boys. So the CTE pathways at Maricopa Community College, just like in wherever you may be from, are very rigorous, and they lead to high-paying, satisfying careers for our boys. Automated technology, healthcare, business management, artificial intelligence, information technology, accounting, aircraft maintenance. These are the qualities that CTE brings to boys that just resonate with them. Hands-on, relevance, applied academics. So there are places where boys shine, where they find their home, and it is in CTE. So that is what our research has found.
Well, it's interesting, Speranza, because when you look at brain science and research done by some of the leading brain scientists in the world, such as John Medina, he talks about how women and men, our brains are different, that we are wired differently. And I think that sometimes in education, we're working against that brain science when we're trying to sometimes force things, and that may not be the politically correct thing to say. However, it does cause me to pause and wonder about some of our initiatives, if we need to put some more time into that brain science to make sure that we're getting it right versus trying to push initiatives for, I'll leave it at that. And Patrick, I am watching your facial expressions, and I know that some of this is striking a chord with you. So I have to ask you, especially when Speranza was mentioning about the ADHD, there's just been at moments where I'm curious what is going on, thinking about brain science, what is going on in your head right now? And if
All
there's
kinds of
something to
things.
chime in on.
All kinds of things. It's like a concert in my head. Think like Coachella, but like speed metal and EDM at the same time, just constantly going back and forth. It's tough to sleep at night, folks, but I get a lot done. No, I love this. Speranza brought that up, and I look at this from a couple different perspectives. Number one, I look at it as a son. I look at it as the son of a man who was an Air Force officer, an accomplished Air Force flying officer, but also an elementary school principal who was a doting father and did everything to make sure that he told me that he loved me and that he appreciated me, and it was inspired by me as his child. And then I also look at it from the perspective of the son of a mother who was an incredible leader in her school district, who was a counselor who influenced hundreds of student lives and then became an administrator and opened up a high school and influenced countless more lives, and who was my little sister, who is a special education teacher currently today, who helps students in so many different ways. And I'm inspired, as a brother. I'm also inspired as a father. I have an 18-year-old son who's more informed and more switched on and more in tune with what is happening in the world today than I ever will be again. Maybe I was at one point during the late 90s, but who knows? I mean, different time, right? I feel that this optimism and this hope kind of overtake me when I see my students, my former students in my coding program, graduating cum laude and summa cum laude from our state universities and going on to not only the workforce, but saying that they want to get their master's degrees and their PhDs in computer science because they want to change the world for the better. And I see all of these things happening with Aaron's students and with the students that Speranza works for, especially in the post-secondary area, where this great swell of hope kind of comes over me. And I'm like, wow, this data is very concerning. And this is something that we do need to be very cognizant of. But I think that even more so as teachers, as people who interact with students on a day-to-day basis, and as influencers, not social media influencers, but influencers of young minds, we have to be very cognizant of brain science and of what is happening in brain science with respect to the learning environment. And this is really what kind of encouraged me when I was in high school and in middle school. I struggled, and you would think that as the son of two parents who were educators, people who really knew the system very well and understood learning theory, learning design, that they would be able to kind of nudge me in the proper directions. But unfortunately, and I think fortunately, personally, I pretty much like me. So I'm just going to say, I'm a neurodiverse person. I was diagnosed with their attention deficit hyperactivity disorder right around when I made that transition from pre-adolescence to adolescence. And although I didn't know it at the time, my brain was going through this incredible physiological change and being bathed in this rich cocktail of chemicals and hormones. And for whatever reason, my particular wiring just didn't quite work like everyone else's. As I mentioned before, I always looked at everyone else and said, why is it so damn easy for everyone else? And why can't I focus? Why can't I pay attention? And later on, I kind of realized, like, I, as an ADHD person, need to work twice as hard and find coping mechanisms to be able to focus on those things that everyone else just finds so easy, or at least is faking it really well, right? So the way that happened was by gravitating towards teachers and gravitating towards programs that were very much more engaging. I don't necessarily mean higher energy. I mean that they were thoughtful about their instructional design. Again, as an educator now, I can go back and I can look at this and go, oh, that's what they did. But those teachers that were very intentional about their instructional design, who shied away from traditional lecture format, who thought that taking notes was just a waste of time, and who actually got me up out of my seat and provided things like realia, meaning things that I could actually hold and touch, and I could manipulate, and I could actually make into something real. I had teachers that cared about relevance over rigor. I had teachers that cared about me as a person, and I had teachers that wanted to give me some sense of validation by teaching me to do a job, teaching me to do it well, telling me that I did a good job, and including me as a part of a community. Because that's truly what I needed. That's truly what I needed as an adolescent male, was to be a part of a community. So I really want to kind of focus on the things that I think that we can do, and based off of the research that we have all done collectively in the books by Dr. Michael Gurian, who wrote The Boy Crisis. Highly recommend that you read it. Also, Brain Rules, another book that I highly recommend that you read as an educator, is instructional design, classroom management, assessment, and then, of course, the most important part of all of this, which is relationship. As Dr. Parsons mentioned, we don't have a lot of males that are stepping up to be good mentors and be good role models. Also, conversely, boys simply aren't looking for males to be role models. And why is that? Well, it's because it all starts with learning. It starts with the classroom environment. And we all know that the best thing that we can do as educators is to have a well-planned, meaningful, and engaging lesson. And for boys, that's going to look a little bit different than it is for girls, because girls are more oriented towards spaces. Again, I'm speaking in generalities, but this is based off of the research that we've done in current brain science, is that girls are more oriented towards spaces, and girls are more oriented towards situations and communications, whereas boys are more oriented towards things. Boys need to actually manipulate things. They need to get up, they need to move. And the traditional post-industrial method of teaching and learning is not acceptable for boys. I would say it's not acceptable for girls too. Personally, I've seen boys and girls in my classroom who I'm like, I can't talk to you anymore. Nothing good is going to happen from me talking anymore. You got to get up. You got to move. Like, you have to do something. You have to touch something. So that's the important piece for instructional design, is that we have to intentionally disconnect ourselves from the way that we were taught, not just in college, but the way that we were taught in high school and middle school. We have to get rid of PowerPoint presentations. I know that they're still a fundamental piece of how we deliver information, but we have to get rid of those. We have to get away from textbooks and worksheets. We have to get away from those traditional methods of assessing the way that students learn. And we have to be more engaging with active participation in our instructional design. Furthermore, we have to incorporate technology. There is no world in which we can have a classroom that does not incorporate technology. And that may be controversial for me to say, but you absolutely will not be successful as a teacher if you cannot incorporate technology seamlessly into your classroom. And it doesn't have to be big, it can be small. The second thing I want to talk about is classroom management. And as far as we know, based on the current science that exists, And again, speaking in generalities, I'm trying not to offend anybody here, but girls are very responsive to direction, meaning that as a teacher, I can give a series of directions, a checklist of directions, almost verbally. And because girls are generally better at compliance, they will do what I ask. Generally, I'm going to just underline that word, generally. Boys need to be managed. Boys need to be managed, and men need to be led. Women also need to be led, but men in particular need to be told, do this step, then come check in with me. Then do this step, then come check in with me. Then do this step and come check in with me. For anybody in CTE, you know that this is an essential part for our learning process, is that we must give our young men and young women, yes, we must give our young men those essential checklist items, and they need to come in and check in with us. So it's important that we are managing boys. We can still give directions to young women. And then assessment is another piece. How we assess young women, we can still use traditional methods. We can still use things like multiple choice criteria on reference tests. We can do things like this. In fact, our SAT and ACT data right now across the United States says that girls are far superior when it comes to their test scores than boys are. Why is that? Well, because there's the brain has developed in a different way at a different rate. And because girls are generally more geared towards that type of learning, they are generally more able to do a large scale criteria on reference tests because they can sit for long periods of time. Then on top of that, I think that we need to look at how we assess boys as being less that and more, show me what you know. Show me how to change those disc brakes on that car. Show me how to write that code on that web page. Show me how to change that pipe on that piece of plumbing. And I'm just spitballing here and throwing things out, but show me how you do things and talk through it at the same time. Those will generally be more effective assessment methods for boys. So project-based learning is a big piece of this. And then finally, the last and most important piece, and again, this is important for both boys and for girls, relationship is the thing that holds this all together. As a man who is taught elementary school, as a man who's been a single father, as a man who wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, I'm going to say that again, as a man who wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, who wanted nothing more, and I know that some people are like, yay, stay-at-home dad, but some people are like, oh, you did? Yes, I absolutely did. I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. As a man, I had to think about, what am I doing here? What am I really doing? Am I trying to just be there for my child? Am I trying to just be there for my students? Am I trying to be nice? Am I trying to be, or am I trying to be a mentor? Because when I looked at my boys, especially my boys in high school, they were mentorless. My boys had very few mentors. They had very few male role models. 5 of my boys have recently joined the military, and it's not because I encouraged them to join the military. It's only a matter because what I demonstrated as far as my behavior in my classroom is that showing up on time is important. Dressing professionally is important. Talking with conviction is important. And being accountable is important. And that also means being accountable to the women in your life. And I'm going to just drop the mic and leave it there.
If I can take the opportunity to pile on to what Patrick was talking about.
Pile it on.
One of the things that kept surfacing in my brain as he talked about it is I talked that when I was in the classroom, I would see a lot of the students leave at between year 1 and year 2, and it was because they were not being successful in their other core academic classes. The conversation was about creating non-traditional pathways for other genders, but I think what I was seeing with men and young men in CTE is that they were going where they were valued. They were trying to find the outlet because they did not feel valued and valuable in their core academic courses. So what CTE seemed to be is the outlet for boys who were fleeing an area that was not welcoming to them, that was not actualizing them, for something where they could do it. And by taking that scenario and enforcing, maybe removing someone from a seat so you could offer it to somebody else was not helping the situation from that perspective.
Rachel, do you have any follow-up questions? I'm sorry, I know I went on like a long rant there, but
This is good stuff, and I'm stepping back because the interactions are so awesome. I don't want to interrupt the flow, so go right ahead.
no, so Dr. Parsons and Speranza really did so much of the research on this to pull this all together, and I'm very blessed they actually invited me to be a part of it. And part of the work that I'm doing right now with some of my colleagues here at WestMech is really geared towards brain-based learning, and it's geared towards what does development look like? What does development look like, and what are we looking at when we look at a homogeneously grouped a set of brains that are only grouped because they have a similar age? Chronologically, they're fine. Yeah, cool. They're all 17. They're all 18. But I can look at one kid and he has more hair on his face than I do. I look at another kid and they are light years ahead of me with technology. I look at another kid and they're reading at a 5th grade level. Why? I mean, like physiologically, they're roughly the same, but they're all changing so much up here that at any given time, if I look at a boy, a girl, another boy, and another boy, and a girl, they could be up to 5 years apart developmentally as far as their brain is concerned. And yet we're all trying to teach them at the same level. Yes, I know we're doing our best to stratify diversify our teaching methods. And we're all doing our best to, teach to the individual learner. But when you have 40 kids in a classroom, you're doing all you can to just survive it. Well, I can't necessarily focus so much on how I design the learning, lest I drive myself mad. So how do we switch? Well, we can switch that by offering students choices and by not worrying so much about things like letter grades and test scores. We can worry about it by doing proficiency models. So if we use proficiency models, then okay, I'm getting like way off topic about boys here. I'm just more like really excited about this whole brain-based learning thing.
Well, and we have a comment in the thread that is right on point with what you're saying, Patrick, that from Jeff Lee, I'm just going to say Jeff, so I don't butcher your last name. My apologies. Work hands-on, the work-based learning is a critical component that's missing in the formula. Soft skills, as Patrick mentioned, is also lacking. And Jeff, it looks like you have your hand raised. So if you have a question that you would like to share with the group, I think this would probably be a good time to be able to respond.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. My image is not showing here because I'm sitting at my desk in my t-shirt with my hair a mess. I've been working at my desk all day. I may have met several of you over the court in the CTE realm over the years. I was the director of the Arizona Register of Contractors for a year, on the EVIT board, on several advisory committees when it comes to construction sciences. So I am not. I'm not an educator. I am an advocate for the CTE type learning. I think it was Patrick, and it may have been Aaron, that mentioned the fact that everybody learns at a different pace, right? But simply because of the way we've had our education system for years, if I'm 6 when I'm in 1st grade, right? If I'm 15, I'm a freshman in high school, and though I understand that with the resources that everybody has, that there has to be something like that. It's almost this grade or this level thing just needs to be eliminated. And if Patrick is exceptional, those of you who know Patrick probably know he's probably exceptional, right? And he can exceed, and he can spread his wings and move forward in a certain area. Maybe it's math, but in English, in the poetry part, right, is stumbling, then he just sticks in that arena, and it doesn't have to be held there. But when I talk about the work-based learning, that may be more simplistic for us in the construction sciences. And some of you may want to know why I call it construction science technology professions, right? Because science is an old word that means to know, and technology is a new word that means to build. And there's nothing about construction that isn't STEM. There's nothing about it. So I worked for years with Cindy Gutierrez to have her, agree with me on that. So she made me add the technology part. But and I'm rambling here, but I think it's awesome that you're tackling this with the boys being left behind. I'm not sure the reason for that. I think some of it is the over focus on travel sports. Honestly, I think some of that it takes a chunk of these kids, right? And the other may just be the way that we as men and as boys, how we learn. Though we have some remarkable young women in some of this construction sciences, that's our other 50%. So I'm sorry to ramble on, but the soft skills, all these other things, but if there's a way, I don't know how we can, how you can turn around the giant ship to accept something that's so ingrained, institutionalized nationally, and the funding methods and all of that, how we do that. But I think the CTE component is really affording those opportunities, because we all know CTE is not for kids who are not college material. It's for young people who have a North Star way before their other friends in high school, right? These kids work, they pass at a higher rate, right? Ms. Cleese, they pass at a higher rate significantly in the 90 percentile versus high school students, and they know where they're going. So if we promoted that aspect and we lifted it up instead of I'm going to put my camera on here. So we lifted it up. So we're not talking about university and CTE like this, because it's not. It's not. University is one form of education. CTE and this other track is another form of organization. There are thousands of people. You've heard the tear the paper ceiling. You all familiar with tear the paper ceiling? That's where we need to be, I think.
Thank you.
In the education world. I'm sorry. I'll quit rambling and I'll turn my camera off.
Great stuff, Jeff. We really appreciate that input and those perspectives. And it's always nice to have business and industry folks chiming in and being a part of the education conversation. I know we're wrapping up with our last 3 minutes, so I do want to mention for the folks tuning in asynchronously, my apologies. I had it in speaker mode, and because our panelists are in the same room, it may have shown Patrick as the main speaker the whole time. We'll find out in the recording, but you'll enjoy his facial expressions throughout all of this. And then,
oh man.
And then I also, Sprante, when we talked prior to getting on here, you had a fantastic call to action to really leave with some hope of what we can do to address this problem. So Sprante, if you can chime in and share with us that call to action.
Yes, thank you. So I would urge each and every one of you to look at the data in the institution disaggregated by gender. We presented this session at various conferences, and we've been in contact with various CTE professionals ever since. And they have already shared with us what they have done and the results that they have already gathered. So we'll just share with you what they've told us. This is what inequalities they have discovered at their institution. They've seen inequalities in grade point average, GPA. They've seen the inequalities in A's and B's versus DNF grades. They've seen inequalities in applicants and students accepted to National Technical Honor Society or other similar honor programs in their institution. They've seen a difference in their CTSO officers. They've seen a difference in IEP and 504 plans, and this has to do with students in special education or students in their disability resources offices. So once you identify these issues in your institution or in your workplace, the answer is in the room. So once you identify these issues, and once you decide to look at them, the answers will come to you if you decide to make this a priority. So, and like we've said, both Patrick and Aaron have said, when you decide to help a group, you will naturally begin to gravitate towards strategies that will help everyone. So helping boys always means that you're also helping the girls.
Rachel, you're muted.
Thank you. And amateur, after going through a pandemic, I should never be muted, right? But Charles Moreland shared in the chat, which I would like to share here because I think it's an important message of hope as well, in addition to Speranta's call to action and just knowing that being that awareness creates action. CTE provides a light at the end of the tunnel. It provides them with the ability to plan their young adulthood while letting them explore careers that may interest them. CTE programs like what's in place in Arizona need to be in large cities like Chicago, LA, or New York. Those cities have CTE programs, but not to the extent of what's already in place in Arizona. Thank you for that, Charles. I think that's I can tell you right now, having worked at Westmec, they will welcome anyone in from any state to view their program. They will share their resources so that this can be replicated in other areas. So please reach out to them, connect, and go visit their campuses because you're going to be blown away. It really is a national model for what CTE can be. And we have 0 seconds. So do any of you want to chime in with a final message as we wrap things up?
I just say thank you all very much for attending today. I appreciate it, Rachel. Thank you again. And Dr. Parsons and Speranza, thank you so much for including me as a part of this conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the time to talk about the subject. I appreciate you for listening.
Thank you. This was an excellent conversation. You guys really did a great job addressing a huge, huge problem and topic and providing some solutions in just an hour, because this, I'm sure we could spend an entire day on. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And please share this recording with your community because this is a message that needs to be addressed everywhere. Bye, everyone.